It was a cold, dark night, and the highway was eerily quiet. The only sound that could be heard was the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. The soft hum of the engine was replaced by the unmistakable screech of metal as a car spun out of control, its tires screeching against the asphalt. A few moments later, the world fell silent once again. Lying in the middle of the wreckage was a woman. Her name was Elena. She had no recollection of what had happened, her mind a blank. Her body was bruised, battered, and broken, but it was the emotional void that hurt her the most. In the wreckage of her car, there was no one to help her, no voice calling for her. She was alone. But she wasn't entirely alone. Max, her loyal dog, stood beside her, barking frantically, trying to rouse her from unconsciousness. He nudged her gently with his snout, but Elena remained still. His heart raced as he desperately licked her face, but it was clear that something was wrong. Her pulse was faint, barely there, and her body seemed so still, too still for comfort. Max had been with Elena for as long as he could remember. They had gone through thick and thin together, shared countless moments of happiness, sorrow, and peace. Elena had been everything to him. She was his world. And now, in the most crucial moment, she was slipping away, and he couldn't comprehend why. His instincts screamed for him to help, but the urgency was overwhelming. Was it too late? Was she beyond saving? As the minutes ticked by, Max did something that only a loyal and determined friend could do. He refused to give up. The noise of the crash had attracted no one, and Elena had no way of calling for help. There were no flashing lights from emergency vehicles, no voices shouting in the distance, no sign of life other than his. Max knew what he had to do. With a sense of urgency flooding his every muscle, he began to tug at Elena's clothing, trying to move her, trying to get her to respond. But there was no reaction. His heart sank as the realization hit him, he was alone in this fight. Elena, his best friend, had no one but him to rely on. Max's instincts kicked in. His sense of duty was clear: if he could not save her directly, he would get her help. He had to. He dashed across the highway, his paws striking the asphalt with urgency. Max's heart raced faster than his legs could carry him. He didn't know what he was doing, where he was going, but he knew he needed to find someone, anyone who could help. His eyes scanned the empty road ahead, but there was nothing. Just the quiet hum of the night, an unsettling silence that only heightened his fears. But the fear wasn't just for himself, it was for Elena, for his best friend who had always been there for him, who had shown him nothing but love and care. Max turned back to check on Elena, her still form barely visible against the black night, a tragic reminder of how vulnerable she was. He could feel the clock ticking down, every second more agonizing than the last. With a deep breath, he moved again, sprinting into the night, desperate to find someone, anyone who could save her. What would happen next? Would he make it in time? And would Elena survive long enough to be saved? In that moment, Max became her lifeline, and the bond between them grew stronger, tested by the fragility of life itself. Elena's eyes fluttered open. The world around her was a blur, bright lights, muffled voices, and a sterile smell that made her feel disoriented. She tried to move, but her body screamed in protest, sending waves of pain through her limbs. The weight of her own body felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else. She blinked a few times, struggling to focus. The faces around her were blurry, figures moving in and out of her vision, but none of it made sense. The last thing she remembered was the screech of tires, the spin of her car, and then, darkness. As her eyes tried to make sense of the hospital room, a wave of dread washed over her. The reality hit her like a ton of bricks. Her world had changed, irrevocably. Everything she once knew seemed like a distant memory, fading further away as she lay in the sterile white room. The pain in her body was excruciating, but it wasn't the physical wounds that tore at her heart. It was the silence. The void. The feeling of being alone. Elena could feel the absence of everything that had once been a part of her life, her independence, her ability to move freely, her strength. It was all gone. What remained was a broken body and a soul weighed down by an unrelenting sadness. But then, as her mind swirled with confusion and despair, she heard it, the soft padding of paws on the floor, followed by a familiar, comforting whine. She turned her head with what little strength she had left, and there he was, Max, sitting quietly at her bedside, his eyes full of concern. His fur was slightly matted, and he looked exhausted, but the moment their gazes met, something shifted in Elena's chest. Max had always been there for her, through every high and low. He was more than just a dog, he was her companion, her confidant, the one being in her life that never wavered. And now, even in the darkest moment of her life, he was still here, just as loyal as ever. Tears welled up in Elena's eyes. She didn't want to cry. She didn't want to feel weak. But the overwhelming flood of emotion was too much to hold back. She reached out a trembling hand, and Max immediately responded, resting his head on her lap, his warm presence a comforting balm for her broken heart. She could feel the steady beat of his heart, strong and unyielding. As she stroked his fur, Elena couldn't help but feel a sense of guilt. Why had this happened to her? Why had she survived when so many others hadn't? And why did she feel like a shadow of the person she once was? But the truth was, she couldn't answer those questions. She didn't know why her life had been torn apart in such a violent way. All she knew was that in that moment, with Max by her side, she wasn't truly alone. Max's presence filled the empty space inside her. He was the one thing in her life that hadn't changed. He was her anchor, the one thread that tied her to the world she once knew. She could feel the strength in him, the unwavering loyalty that kept him by her side no matter how bad things got. And though she didn't have the answers, she knew one thing for certain, she wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. But there were still days ahead of her, long, difficult days filled with physical therapy, emotional recovery, and the slow realization that she had to rebuild everything. She didn't know how she would do it, but with Max beside her, she felt a flicker of hope. It was small, fragile, but it was there. Elena whispered to him softly, "Thank you, Max. I'll get through this, I promise." And for the first time in what felt like forever, she believed it. The days following Elena's accident passed in a haze. Time seemed to blur, the pain in her body consuming her every waking moment, while the nights were filled with restless sleep, disturbed by dreams that never seemed to make sense. Yet, through it all, one constant remained, Max. His unwavering presence was both a comfort and a reminder that, despite everything, she wasn't truly alone. It wasn't easy. The physical therapy was grueling, each movement a reminder of what she had lost. Elena often found herself exhausted after just a few steps, her body betraying her as it struggled to regain the strength it once had. But through every session, Max was by her side, quietly watching her, offering his silent support. He never left her alone for more than a few minutes, always returning to her side when she needed him most. It was in those small moments that Elena began to heal. Every time she pushed herself a little further, Max was there to encourage her with a soft nudge of his nose or a reassuring wag of his tail. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep her going. The simple act of walking, something she had once taken for granted, became a monumental task. Each step was a reminder of how far she had fallen, but also of how far she could go. And with Max beside her, there was no limit to what she could accomplish. "Just a little farther, girl," she whispered to herself one morning, as she stood with Max by her side, trying to take a few tentative steps without assistance. It wasn't much, but it was progress. The ache in her muscles was unbearable, but she fought through it, determined not to let it defeat her. Max stood still, his eyes focused on her, as if urging her forward. The mornings were the hardest. Elena often woke up feeling overwhelmed by the weight of everything, the fear of never fully recovering, the sadness that lingered like a dark cloud over her, and the constant reminder that her life would never be the same. But each day, as she opened her eyes, there was Max, waiting for her to wake, ready to help her face the new day. They became a team, working together to heal. Elena would help Max with his own needs, just as he helped her with hers. It was a delicate dance, both of them learning how to adapt to their new reality, but it was a reality that they were facing together. Slowly, the pain in her heart began to soften. Max's presence was a balm for her fractured spirit, his loyalty and love helping her piece together the parts of herself that she had thought were lost forever. There were days when Elena would break down, the weight of it all too much to bear. On those days, Max would nudge her gently, curling up beside her on the couch, his head resting on her lap as if to say, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." His presence was a steadying force, a reminder that no matter how dark things seemed, there was still light to be found. The connection they shared was undeniable. Max wasn't just her dog, he was her best friend, her confidant, and her lifeline. The bond between them had always been strong, but now, it was stronger than ever. As Elena looked down at him one evening, his eyes full of love and understanding, she realized something. The love they shared wasn't just about companionship, it was about survival. They had both survived something that could have broken them. And together, they were going to make it through the rest. Each small victory, a few more steps, a day with less pain, a moment of laughter, was a step forward in her healing journey. And though the road ahead was long, Elena now knew one thing for sure, she wasn't facing it alone. Not anymore. As the weeks passed, Elena found herself growing more accustomed to the rhythm of recovery. It wasn't easy, and some days felt like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but there was undeniable progress. Her body slowly began to regain its strength, and the lingering shadow of despair that had once consumed her was beginning to lift. Max was there for every small victory. The first time Elena walked unassisted across the room, she couldn't help but smile, a genuine smile that had been absent from her face for far too long. She could feel the strain in her muscles, the remnants of her accident still weighing her down, but it didn't matter. She had made it. And Max, standing beside her, his tail wagging excitedly, was her living proof that she was not alone in this journey. Her physical progress was the most visible. She could walk farther, stand longer, and, slowly, with Max's help, she began to take back control of her life. But it wasn't just her body that was healing. The emotional scars, the ones that ran much deeper, were still there, and those would take much longer to mend. Some days, the sadness would creep back in, especially in the quiet moments when Elena found herself reflecting on all that she had lost. She missed the person she had been before the accident, the person who was independent, confident, and full of life. But as she sat with Max in the evenings, the weight of it all seemed a little lighter. His presence grounded her, reminded her that the road to healing wasn't linear, it was full of ups and downs, twists and turns. One afternoon, after a particularly challenging therapy session, Elena sat down on the couch, exhausted but determined. Max jumped up beside her, nuzzling her side, as if to say, "You did it. We're getting there." She smiled, grateful for his unwavering support. She didn't have to say anything, Max always understood. In those moments, Elena could feel a flicker of hope that had long been absent. She began to realize that healing wasn't about returning to who she had been. It was about embracing who she was becoming. The accident had changed her, but it hadn't broken her. And with each passing day, she found herself growing stronger, not just physically, but emotionally as well. Max had always been more than just a pet to Elena. He was her companion, her protector, and her best friend. And now, more than ever, he was her rock. When she felt overwhelmed, when the weight of everything seemed too much to bear, Max was there, a constant reminder that she wasn't alone. She could see how much he had grown, too. The once anxious dog, who had frantically tried to wake her after the accident, had transformed into a calm, patient companion. He no longer jumped around excitedly when she stood up or walked a few steps. Instead, he sat quietly beside her, his eyes full of pride. Elena couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for him. He had been her lifeline when everything had seemed lost, and now, he was still by her side, as loyal as ever. For the first time since the accident, Elena allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a future. It wouldn't be the same future she had once imagined, but it was a future worth fighting for. She had come this far, and with Max beside her, she knew there was no limit to what she could achieve. Every day, she grew a little stronger, a little more confident. It wasn't just the physical milestones that mattered anymore, it was the emotional resilience she was building, piece by piece, day by day. With Max by her side, Elena was learning how to live again, and this time, she wasn't going to take any moment for granted. It had been months since Elena's accident, and while the worst of the physical recovery was behind her, new challenges began to emerge. As much as she had made strides in her rehabilitation, as much as she had started to regain her confidence and strength, life wasn't about to let her off the hook that easily. The healing process, she soon realized, was never linear. One bright Saturday morning, as Elena and Max took their usual walk in the park, something unexpected happened. Max, who had been her steadfast companion throughout her recovery, suddenly pulled away from her. He was usually so well-behaved, walking calmly beside her, but today he was frantic, tugging at the leash as though something had caught his attention. His behavior was erratic, unlike anything Elena had seen before. "Max, what's wrong?" Elena called softly, trying to calm him down. But Max was relentless. He kept darting back and forth, his tail tucked between his legs, and his eyes wide with fear. Elena felt a chill run down her spine as she tried to regain control of the situation. She had been so used to having Max by her side, calm and steady, but now something was clearly unsettling him. Then she saw it. A man appeared from behind a tree, a tall, menacing figure who was staring at them intently. His eyes were cold, and there was something about him that felt wrong, out of place. Max growled low in his throat, and Elena instinctively stepped back, holding the leash tighter. Her heart began to race, not from fear of the man, but from the sudden overwhelming sense of vulnerability that washed over her. She was alone in this moment, with no one else around to help, and her body still wasn't fully healed. "Max, stay," Elena whispered, trying to keep her composure. She could feel her legs trembling, a reminder of just how far she had come, and just how fragile she still was. The man didn't move, but his presence was intimidating. Max continued to growl, his hackles raised, clearly sensing something sinister. Elena's mind raced. Was this an encounter she could walk away from? Or was this a trial that would test her in a way she had never been tested before? The minutes felt like hours, and just when Elena was beginning to wonder if she would have to make a run for it, the man finally broke the silence. "Just wanted to say hello," he said in a low voice, a strange smile curling on his lips. His tone was casual, but there was an edge to it, a kind of malice that Elena could sense deep in her gut. Max wasn't having any of it. With a growl that seemed to vibrate the air around them, he lunged toward the man, his teeth bared in a warning. Elena's heart raced as she pulled Max back, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The man didn't flinch. Instead, he just stood there, his smile widening. "I don't think you'll be needing that dog much longer," the man said, his voice dripping with something dangerous. A surge of panic gripped Elena's chest. Was this a threat? Could she trust Max to protect her? Her body trembled, not just from the physical weakness that still lingered in her muscles, but from the uncertainty that gripped her. She had been through so much already, but now, facing this stranger in the park, she felt more vulnerable than ever. But Max, sensing her fear, stepped forward, unwavering. He was ready to defend her, just as he always had. In that moment, Elena realized something. She wasn't alone, not even in the face of this new challenge. Max would protect her, no matter what. Together, they had already overcome so much. And no matter what this man said or did, they would face it together. "Get out of here," Elena said, her voice trembling but steady. She took a step forward, as if to assert some control over the situation. Max stood beside her, poised and protective. To her surprise, the man didn't argue. With a last, lingering glance, he turned and disappeared into the trees, leaving Elena and Max standing there, in the quiet park, their bond stronger than ever. The encounter shook Elena to her core. It wasn't just the threat of the man, it was the realization that, despite everything she had been through, she wasn't as invulnerable as she once thought. There would always be new challenges, new trials that would test her resolve. But with Max by her side, she knew she could face anything that came her way. The weeks that followed the unsettling encounter in the park left Elena shaken, but she wasn't going to let it define her. She had come too far, fought too hard, to let one moment of fear undo all the progress she had made. Max's presence was a constant reminder of that. With him by her side, she had faced the darkest moments of her life, and together, they had come out stronger. However, the emotional scars were more difficult to heal than the physical ones. The fear that had gripped her that day in the park lingered in the back of her mind, lurking like a shadow, waiting to strike again. Every new person she met, every new place she went, carried a quiet sense of anxiety. She had learned to trust Max with her life, but there were still moments when she felt the crushing weight of her vulnerability. But Elena was determined. She had come so far, and she wasn't about to let the past, or the fear of what might happen, hold her back. Max could sense her unease, and whenever the anxiety would start to rise, he was there, his gentle presence grounding her. His ability to sense when she was struggling emotionally was uncanny. He would nuzzle her hand, sit at her feet, or curl up beside her on the couch, just to let her know that she wasn't alone. The days slowly became easier. Elena was still working hard on her physical rehabilitation, and while it was exhausting, it was also empowering. Every step she took, every small achievement, was another reminder of how far she had come. She began to walk farther, run a little bit, and, most importantly, she started to feel like herself again. The woman who had once been full of life and confidence was returning, piece by piece. But it wasn't just the physical healing that was taking place. Elena began to reclaim parts of herself that she had lost in the aftermath of the accident. She rediscovered her love for painting, a passion she had abandoned after the crash. She began spending time with friends again, slowly but surely reintroducing joy and connection into her life. Her sense of independence, which had been so shattered, was gradually coming back. Max was with her every step of the way. He was her constant companion, her protector, and her cheerleader. When she painted, he lay quietly beside her, watching her with his warm, unwavering eyes. When she went out to meet friends, he was there, waiting patiently at the door, ready to accompany her on every new adventure. One evening, as Elena sat in the backyard, gazing up at the stars, she felt a profound sense of peace. It had been a long time since she had felt truly at ease, and for the first time since the accident, she felt a sense of gratitude for the journey she had been on. It hadn't been easy, and there had been moments when she thought she wouldn't make it, but she had. And she wasn't just surviving, she was living. Max trotted over to her, his tail wagging gently. He sat down beside her, leaning against her leg as if to say, "You're not alone, Elena. We've come this far, together." And she realized that, as long as she had him, she would never be alone again. With each passing day, Elena could feel herself growing stronger, more whole. The scars, both visible and hidden, were a part of her, but they didn't define her. She was becoming someone new, someone resilient, and with Max by her side, she knew that she could face whatever came next. For the first time in a long time, Elena allowed herself to dream again. Her life might look different now, but it was still hers to shape. And with Max beside her, the possibilities seemed endless. Elena had never realized how much her life could change in such a short time. Every day, she felt stronger, more capable. The woman she had once been was slowly re-emerging, though she was different now. Life had tested her, and though she had been bent, she had never broken. And as each day passed, Elena became more aware of the depth of her own resilience. Her recovery was no longer just about surviving. It was about thriving. She had started taking small steps toward rebuilding the life she had lost, a life that was no longer defined by the pain of her accident, but by the strength she had gained through it. Max had been her anchor through it all, and now, she was beginning to realize that her journey was as much about him as it was about her. Max had changed too. The anxious, frantic dog who had pulled at the leash after the accident was now calm and steady. He had always been protective of her, but there was something different in his eyes now. He seemed to sense her growth, just as she had sensed his. Together, they had learned to navigate the uncertainties of life, to find joy in the little things, and to appreciate the healing that had taken place, both physical and emotional. One evening, Elena and Max went for a walk through the park where they had encountered the stranger. The memory of that day was still fresh in her mind, but it no longer held the same power over her. It was just another part of her story, one that she had lived through and conquered. As they walked, Elena realized how much she had grown since that day. She wasn't the same woman she had been before the accident, but she was proud of who she had become. Max was walking beside her, his steps confident and steady. His presence was a reminder of how far they had both come, how they had each faced their own struggles and found strength in the other. And, in that moment, Elena realized something profound. Growth wasn't just about recovering from the past, it was about embracing the future. "Look at us, Max," Elena said softly, her voice filled with a mix of pride and gratitude. "We've come so far." Max looked up at her, his eyes filled with understanding. His tail wagged gently, and for a moment everything felt perfect. The weight of the past was still there, but it didn't define her anymore. It was just part of the journey, a chapter that had led her to this point. Elena had started to make plans for the future, things she had put off for so long. She was finally ready to return to work, to engage with the world again. And the fear that once held her back was beginning to fade. With Max by her side, she felt ready to take on whatever came next. It wasn't going to be easy, life never was, but she knew that, together, they could face anything. The bond between Elena and Max was no longer just about loyalty, it had become something deeper, something unbreakable. They had healed together, grown together, and now they were looking forward to a future filled with possibilities. Elena smiled as she looked down at Max. "You're my best friend, you know that," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. Max's ears perked up at her words, and he gave her a gentle nudge, as if to say, "I know." For Elena, this was more than just a walk in the park. It was a celebration of everything they had been through, everything they had overcome. It was a reminder that no matter how dark the past had been, there was always light ahead, and together, they would find it. The calm, steady rhythm of Elena and Max's routine was shattered one fateful afternoon. They had been out for a walk, as usual, when Elena suddenly felt a sharp pain in her chest. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, an all-encompassing fear that gripped her heart with a vice-like intensity. Max, who had always been by her side, was no longer there. Elena looked around in confusion, her breath quickening as the pain in her chest intensified. The world around her seemed to tilt. Her once steady legs faltered, and she stumbled to the ground, panic rising inside her. "Max," she gasped, calling out desperately for the dog who had always been her constant companion. She looked frantically in every direction, but there was no sign of him. Tears welled up in her eyes as the realization hit. Max was gone. It was as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet, and she had been left in a void. Her heart raced, her mind racing even faster. Was he hurt? Was he lost? The thought of not having him by her side, not knowing where he was or if he was safe, sent waves of panic crashing over her. For a brief moment, Elena was paralyzed by fear. All the progress she had made, all the healing she had worked so hard for, seemed to crumble in an instant. It was as if the very foundation of her recovery had been ripped away. Max had been her anchor, the one thing she had been able to rely on when everything else felt uncertain. And now, without him, she felt adrift, lost in a sea of overwhelming emotions. She struggled to stand, her legs shaky, and her chest tight with the weight of her fear. The world around her felt blurry, distant, as if she were seeing everything through a fog. All of the trauma she had endured, the healing she had fought for, felt insignificant compared to the thought of losing Max. Then, just as quickly as the panic had hit, she heard it. The sound of familiar paws on the ground, the soft click of his claws against the pavement. Elena's heart leaped in her chest as she turned toward the sound. Max was running toward her, his fur ruffled, but his eyes shining with unmistakable joy. He had been nearby all along, just out of sight. Elena collapsed to the ground in relief, tears streaming down her face as Max bounded toward her, his tail wagging furiously. He nuzzled her gently, as if apologizing for the scare he had caused. "I thought I lost you," Elena whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Max licked her face, his eyes full of love and understanding, as though to say, "I'm here. I'll never leave you." For a long moment, Elena just sat there, holding Max tightly, her chest heaving as the adrenaline from the panic began to subside. She realized, in that instant, just how deeply her bond with him had grown. He wasn't just a dog, he was her partner, her lifeline, her protector. The thought of losing him had nearly shattered her, and yet, here he was, back by her side. The emotional jolt had shaken Elena to her core, but it also gave her something important. It reminded her of the depth of the love and trust she had built with Max. It reminded her that no matter what came her way, she wasn't alone. He would always be there, just as she had been there for him. Together, they had come so far, and together, they would continue to face the challenges that lay ahead. Elena took a deep breath, wiping away her tears as she looked into Max's eyes. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice filled with gratitude. "You saved me. Again." Max simply rested his head on her lap, his eyes closed in contentment, as if to say, "Always." The calm after the storm didn't last long. Days after Max's brief disappearance, Elena's world was rocked again. She had finally started to feel confident about her recovery, but just as she was beginning to embrace her new life, another challenge emerged, this time, one that would test not just her physical strength, but her emotional endurance. It all started when Elena received a phone call from her doctor. The voice on the other end was calm, but the news was anything but. "Elena, we need to talk about your scans," the doctor said, his tone measured, but there was a subtle concern that crept through his words. "It's not the news we were hoping for. There's a complication, a lingering issue that could affect your long-term recovery." Elena's stomach dropped as she tried to absorb the words. For a moment, everything around her seemed to blur. She had come so far, fought so hard to rebuild her life, and now this. The fear of losing everything, of being faced with yet another mountain to climb, was overwhelming. She felt the panic rising, just like it had when she had lost Max in the park. Max, sensing the shift in her energy, came over and sat by her side, his ears pricked, his head tilted slightly in concern. He could feel her distress, just as he always had. "What does this mean?" Elena asked, her voice shaky, barely above a whisper. "What do I have to do?" "There are options, but they're risky," the doctor replied, his voice gentle. "It would mean another surgery, possibly months of additional recovery. It's not guaranteed to work, but without it, the issue could worsen over time." The weight of the decision felt like 1,000 pounds pressing down on her chest. Elena had already been through so much. She had faced the physical pain, the emotional upheaval, and the uncertainty of her future. She had fought to reclaim her life, and now, it seemed like everything was hanging in the balance once more. She could feel the fear creeping back, the same fear that had paralyzed her after the accident. The thought of going through another painful procedure, of enduring more time spent recovering, made her stomach churn. She wanted to run away from it all, to pretend the decision didn't exist, but she knew she couldn't. She had come too far to give up now. Max nudged her hand, offering his silent support. He had been there for her through everything. His unwavering loyalty reminded her of the strength she had within herself, the strength that she had learned to tap into time and time again. She wasn't the same woman she had been before the accident. She was stronger, more resilient. And no matter what happened, she knew she had to make this decision for herself. Taking a deep breath, Elena looked down at Max, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I can't give up," she whispered, the words firm this time. "I won't." I've come too far to stop now. Max's tail wagged softly as if to reassure her that she wasn't alone in this decision. He had always been her protector, her source of strength, and now, it was her turn to fight for her future, just as she had fought to get this far. Elena made her decision. She would go through with the surgery. She would face the uncertainty, the pain, and the challenges ahead, because she knew that her recovery wasn't just about the destination, it was about the journey. And with Max by her side, she could face anything. As she hung up the phone and stared out the window, Elena felt a quiet resolve settle in her chest. She wasn't just going to survive this next challenge, she was going to conquer it. And no matter how difficult the road ahead, she knew that Max would be there, just as he always had, to guide her through it. With a steadying breath, Elena stood up, feeling a sense of clarity she hadn't felt before. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled her. She had made her choice, and now, she was ready to face whatever came next. "Let's do this, Max," she said quietly, her voice filled with determination. Max looked up at her with his ever-loyal eyes, his presence steady and unyielding. "Together," he seemed to say. And with that, Elena took the first step toward her next chapter, knowing that with Max by her side, there was no obstacle too great to overcome. The days leading up to the surgery were a blur. Elena focused on preparing herself mentally, physically, and emotionally for the challenging road ahead. But despite the fear and uncertainty, there was something different in the way she approached it. She wasn't overwhelmed by the enormity of the challenge, she was ready to face it. She had already faced the impossible and survived. Now, this surgery was just another step in her journey, a journey that was far from over. Max stayed by her side, unwavering. Every day, he would nudge her gently, reminding her that she wasn't alone. His presence was a constant source of comfort, his love a reminder of the strength that lay within her. Even on the hardest days, when the fear of the unknown threatened to consume her, Max was there, always present, always steady, always ready to help her keep moving forward. The surgery itself was long and arduous, but Elena handled it with a resilience she hadn't known she possessed. She fought through the pain, each day a reminder of how much she had already overcome. The road to recovery was grueling, but every small victory, every step she took, every moment of progress, reminded her that she was stronger than she had ever been before. And through it all, Max was there, waiting patiently for her to regain her strength. He never left her side, always ready to help her take the next step, even when it seemed impossible. Weeks passed, and Elena began to feel the faint stirrings of hope. Her body was healing. Her spirit was healing. And slowly, she began to believe that the life she had once thought lost was within reach again. The pain, the fear, the doubt, they no longer had the power to control her. She had fought for her future, and now, she was living it. One afternoon, as she stood by the window, watching the sunlight filter through the trees, Elena felt a sense of peace settle in her heart. She had come so far, not just in terms of physical recovery, but in terms of the person she had become. She was no longer the woman who had been broken by the accident. She was someone new, someone stronger, someone who had learned to embrace life in all its complexity. Max walked over and lay down beside her, resting his head on her lap as she stroked his fur. She smiled down at him, her heart full of gratitude. He had been with her through every moment of this journey, his love and loyalty unwavering. Without him, she didn't know if she would have made it. He had been her lifeline, her anchor, her constant reminder that no matter what, she was never truly alone. "I couldn't have done it without you," Elena whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Max. You've saved me more times than I can count." Max looked up at her, his eyes full of love and understanding. He didn't need words to answer. His presence, his steady companionship, said it all. As Elena gazed out the window, watching the world go by, she knew that the future wasn't certain, but it was hers to shape. She had come through the darkest days of her life, and with Max by her side, there was nothing she couldn't face. Together, they had found a way to heal, to rebuild, and to move forward. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but Elena was no longer afraid. She had already proven to herself that she was stronger than she had ever realized, and with Max by her side, she knew that she could face whatever the future held. With a deep breath, Elena smiled. The past was behind her. The future was waiting. And whatever came next, she would face it with courage, strength, and the love of a loyal friend.